Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Zach Young. I am president of the William F. Buckley Junior program at Yale. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our program, we are an organization that was founded several years ago by Yale undergraduates that aspires to expand political discourse and promote intellectual diversity at Yale. We do this through a variety of offerings of the program, which range from our speaker series, an event of which is taking place right now, in addition to our summer internships that we are able to fund, and conferences, our debate series, and plenty of other things we'd be happy to tell you about. It now brings me great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Senator Jim DeMint. Senator DeMint was born in Greenville, South Carolina in the baby boomer generation. Educated in the public school system, he went on to attend the University of Tennessee and receive an MBA from Clemson University. He worked in market research before founding his own firm, the DeMint Group. It was not actually until age 47 that DeMint first ran for office, which is an encouraging sign for those seniors who are trying out the private sector first, that you can always come back and make it in politics. At the time when he decided to run for office, DeMint recalled being tired of beating his television set. He ended up winning that election and serving South Carolina's 4th Congressional District for 3 terms, an amount that he pledged not to exceed. During his time in Congress, DeMint broke rank with his party several times, voting against President Bush's No Child Left Behind program and also opposing Medicare Part D. His reputation as one of Washington's conservative leaders grew when he was elected to the Senate in 2004. He drew national attention for his work to end congressional earmarks, and his advocacy for limited government, individual liberty, a strong national defense, and traditional values has not gone unnoticed. He was also one of 2 senators to vote against Hillary Clinton's appointment to Secretary of State. In 2013, DeMint stepped down from his Senate seat to become president of the Heritage Foundation, which DeMint said felt like coming home. He is also the author of a number of books, a few of which include Now or Never, Saving America from Economic Collapse, and Saving Freedom, We Can Stop America's Slide into Socialism. His latest book, Falling in Love with America Again, debuted at #1 on the Washington Post bestseller list. One last thing I personally would like to add is that, like our namesake Bill Buckley, Jim DeMint has made a point of trying to unify social and fiscal conservatism. He has said you can't be a fiscal conservative and not be a social conservative. There's a lot more thought to that statement, but I'm sure you can ask or you can look up and see what his thoughts are on that. Of course, something else that Bill Buckley long tried to do. Today, Senator DeMint will be focusing his remarks on academic censorship as a political weapon. Then there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. For these, I direct you to the microphones on either side of the room. These might amplify your voice, they might just work into the TV. So in any case, be sure to speak up and be loud when you're asking your question. This event will conclude at approximately 5:30 p.m., just to give you a sense of the scheduling. But for now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Senator DeMint.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. As you know, we were snowed out a month or so ago, but it's great to be here. And although a lot of you complain about the piles of snow around, we drove from Hartford over here. I love to look at snow coming from South Carolina, and this is such beautiful country, and I'm glad to be with you. Thank you, Zach. I need to explain the vote against Hillary Clinton, because it's recently been in the news as to why I did. In the committee, it became apparent that she and Bill had an international foundation that they were encouraged foreign governments, foreign companies to give to. Now, there was an apparent conflict of interest in my mind for the Secretary of State to be in a position of soliciting donations from other governments and other interests all around the world. And I told her in the committee, and I was in the committee that was sending her to the floor for a final vote. And I said, Hillary, I believe you could be a great Secretary of State, but I cannot vote for you unless you withdraw yourself from this foundation. And she didn't, and I didn't, and that's how it ended up that way. But it's that kind of blindness to conflicts of interest where only two people did not see the very obvious conflict of interest that existed there is disturbing to me. But that's not what I came to talk about. What I'd like to do is just share some thoughts and some stories. I've made some notes, and then just talk to you, answer your questions about any subject you'd like to talk about today. I do appreciate you being here, especially in academia today, to represent some of the ideas of Bill Buckley. It's pretty exciting here at Yale for that to be going on, and I admire your courage. I'm sure it's not always popular to admit that you're a conservative on campus, and a lot of times it was not popular in Congress to say the same thing. You're an extremist if you even believe in balancing your checkbook in Washington, I promise you that. But let me just start out with telling a story about a young guy named Omar Mahmoud. You may have heard of him. He was in the news a couple of months ago. He's a junior at the University of Michigan. He writes for both the mainstream campus newspaper, the Michigan Daily, and the university's alternative conservative publication, the Michigan Review. At least he did write for these until he became one of the latest victims of academia's political correctness. Omar recently wrote a short satire on the check your privilege fad. Some of you may be familiar with it. Check your privilege. And it was just a tongue-in-cheek article that described a system of right-handed privilege that was oppressing left-handed people everywhere through daily right-handed microaggressions. It was just humorous, it was harmless, it was conservative. In response, the Michigan Daily invoked a technicality to kick Omar out of his writing gig, claiming a conflict of interest. Much worse, a group of students vandalized his room, pelting the door with eggs and hot dogs, and attached hateful messages calling him scum and told him to shut up and leave the school. The editor of the Michigan Review, the conservative paper, said these progressive students attacked Omar because they felt that he, as a Muslim, cannot also be a conservative. I wonder whether more media networks would have sounded the hate crime alarm over the attacks on Omar if it weren't for his political views. Instance like this, when someone says something unpopular, then gets hounded out of business or bullied as he was, can happen almost anywhere in America today. But they are most likely to happen on our college campuses and universities, where honest inquiry and debate are quickly becoming secondary to the right not to hear contrary opinions, the right not to hear contrary opinions. Recently, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education released a report determining that most U.S. colleges now violate free speech rights. Now, this is an important issue because a free and dynamic civil society is based on the free exchange of ideas, and it's one of the things that helps diversity work. When everyone can share their opinion, they don't feel oppressed by others. So this is critical to so much of what we believe as a free society. But this applies both to students and those who are allowed to address them. As you know, a few months ago, Scripps College disinvited political and cultural commentator George Will from giving a lecture as part of its Elizabeth Hubert Mallet Public Affairs program. George's sin was simply failure to toe the progressive line regarding statistics and rhetoric about sexual assault on campus. So instead of engaging him or debating him, Scripps wouldn't let him speak. I wrote that before you announced here that he was going to be your guest of honor at your upcoming disinvitation dinner in April, which I think is a great idea. Last year, you also gave a platform to Hirsi Ali when the forces of political correctness tied themselves in knots over whether to side with the feminists or the extremists that she opposed. A teaching assistant at Marquette University recently banned discussion of homosexual marriage in an ethics class, even though it would seem the perfect place for such a discussion, saying that mere discussion of such matters would be homophobic. When a tenured professor, John McAdams, spoke out against this censorship on his blog, the university responded by suspending him from teaching and banning him from the campus. So not only are students forbidden from talking about certain subjects, but a professor is now forbidden from complaining that the subjects are forbidden. These instances of academic intolerance go hand in hand with a general revolutionary insanity among students, which seems to be promoted more than the actual education on campuses these days. At the University of California, Irvine, the student council wanted to ban the American flag from its offices and common areas. At ACLU, the student council debated for 40 minutes over whether being Jewish was a strike against a nominee for their judicial board. It seems we hear a new story every week. When you put blinders on students to protect them from ideas that might hurt their feelings, they also become blinded to ridiculous and offensive behavior of their own. This isn't just an American problem. Academia spans nations, and its diseases can swim across oceans. At one of the world's most famous houses of learning, Oxford, a pro-abortion versus anti-abortion debate was canceled last fall. Apparently, men weren't allowed to have opinions on such things in an education setting anymore. For the record, even the pro-abortion debater thought this was ridiculous. When an academic debate is reduced to the identity of the speakers, you have officially declared that objective truth does not matter, if you even believe it existed in the first place. Of course, private colleges have a right to determine their speakers and publications. But any institution of higher learning worthy of the name should be open to the free exchange of ideas. Censorship in academia is being excused using the same justification of all censorship throughout history, that those considered lacking in virtue don't get a platform to speak. Free speech applies only to people who are saying the right things. The left knows that if there is honest and open debate, those who have the truth on their side will win out. And this happens to be the worst case scenario for people who aren't concerned with the truth as much as with political power. They've taken a page from Saul Alinsky's, several pages in fact. The famous community organizer's book, Rules for Radicals, gives great insight into the progressive mind. In his words, you don't communicate with anyone purely on rational facts or the ethics of an issue. Instead, he famously wrote, the left needs to pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. So there you have it. Don't debate. Don't argue with the other side. Shut down the conversation and cast anyone who disagrees with you as some type of a monster. This mania for censorship isn't exclusive to campuses, although it finds its perfection there. You can see it in private business, mainstream media, social media, and the attitudes of our elected leaders. Occasionally, a member of the wealthy elite gets thrown under the bus by members of his own class, almost as a sacrificial offering to the out-of-control radicals that they helped train to win them elections. You may remember what happened to the CEO of Firefox last year, Brendan Eich, who was shouted into retirement because years before he supported California's Proposition 8, affirming marriage between a man and a woman. Now, 52% of his fellow Californians agreed with him. And a journalist, Nate Silver, reported that many other executives in Silicon Valley also supported the measure. But he was still thrown away by the ruling class like a herd of buffalo letting the sick and weak fall prey to the wolves. It's cliche to hear about movie stars wearing Che Guevara t-shirts while living in mansions, but it's the same hypocrisy at play here. The elites foster a rabid hatred of traditional values, constitutional order, meritocracy, and honest debate in the segments of the culture under their control, whether it's a city, a campus, or an audience. Then when the uproar that they help create turns into abuse and censorship, they sit by. They allow some people to soak up the abuse and let their troops vent their rage at the innocent. The issues have changed, the venues have changed. The intimidation everyone fears no longer comes from radical gangs protesting in government offices, but gangs of radicals shaming you on Twitter. Nonetheless, the underlying tactics have remained the same. The last 15 years of tech innovation and near universal adoption of social media have made it easier than ever to pick, freeze, personalize, and polarize an issue. And an unintended consequence of political debate being reduced to a tweet or to a rant on a website comment section is that real-world actions of progressives have become even less rational, more indefensible, and more cowardly because they're often anonymous. Perhaps that's why Omar's peers thought it was a great idea to taunt him with hot dogs and slurs, an act simultaneously outrageous and juvenile, because their thoughts have been reduced to 140 characters at a time. But there is a wealth of intelligence and civil discourse on the internet. You have to look for it. Technology doesn't really control our minds, but blind ideology can. That is the cause and the purpose of this phenomenon. Academic censorship, political correctness, saying who has the right to speak on a topic and who does not, bullying those who break the taboos of this new cultural Marxism, it all adds up to a means of control. Control who gets to speak, and you control the debate. Control the debate, and you control how people think. Control how people think, and you control society. After all, the easiest way to win an argument is to tape your opponent's mouth shut. Too many educators today think this is a good idea. They think their own righteousness sanctifies these tactics. Whether it happens in the Ivy League or state colleges or even high schools, it affects the rest of the nation. The surrender of one institution sets precedent for the surrender of the next, and eventually most of academia. Along with it, hundreds of thousands of bright minds will only hear one side of the debate, one that teaches them to despise their national heritage, to rebel for the sake of rebellion, and to profane the sacred on the belief that nothing is sacred, except for the idols that the elites themselves create. They will live and act according to this narrow existence, passionate to say and think exactly what's in fashion and careful to condemn all the undesirables who do differently. The truth will take a back seat to the whims of man. That's not a country I want my children's children to grow up in, and I don't think many of you do either. So it's all the more important that you dissent from this new culture of censorship and offer clear, well-argued, philosophical, and political alternatives. All it takes is a few people with courage to change the course of history. Many of your progressive peers have never heard real conservative ideas beyond the parodies on The Daily Show. I encourage you to give them another way, a better way. Let the abuse bounce off of you and always be of good cheer. A good character is a magnet for good conversation. And in those conversations, you can reveal truths that indoctrinated students have never even considered. The work you do here at Yale and the work of the William F. Buckley Jr. program is of paramount importance to your fellow students and your peers around the nation. Never let anyone silence you or to silence the truth. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. I'll stay here since I'm at a microphone too, so please.
Yeah, so I'd like to ask about conservative censorship and how we avoid that. Being from South Carolina also, I'm familiar with an institution I'm sure Mr. DeMint is, Bob Jones University.
Right.
So how do conservatives avoid creating their own form of censorship, their own impositions of beliefs that he's decrying the liberals doing?
Yeah. I'm not sure if you picked the best examples. I've seen some fairly good debates at Bob Jones. Certainly they have their own philosophical view, but I think that's a great question, because I think if you look back over the past decades back, the moral majority, there was a sense that not only were we right on the right, but we wanted to force our opinions down other people's throats using the government. At least that was the implication. I'm not sure if that was the real intent. But I think it can be a problem for all of us if we think we're right and we want to push our opinions onto others. But part of being an American is, and I think part of being free, is giving other people the chance to say things that you disagree with and get involved in civil discourse. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't like to hear that I know from personal experience are not true. But it still does not give me the right to go to government and appeal that government shut them up, or go to the university president and say, shut that person up. But it's a good question, and it's a good point. Whether you're on the right or the left, we should engage in open debate and exchange of ideas with people we disagree with. Again, that's what makes diversity work. And you can have a cohesive, diverse society if people are free to live their lives the way they want, to believe what they want, and to exchange ideas freely. You might not always like it, but at least you don't feel oppressed. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the question was actually pretty similar to what I was going to ask. But so I'm from Georgia, and there was a debate. Hopefully, glad it's over now. There was a debate in Georgia about AP US history. And they were talking about how the AP US history curriculum said a lot of things in that curriculum that was not pro-America enough. And it was a great debate by conservatives that they didn't want to hear all of that. They really wanted a much more pro-America curriculum out of the AP US history. And so he asked, and you answered about whether conservatives should be engaged in this kind of censorship. But my question is more pointed in, do you agree that this is just as much a problem on the right, and that the right uses these tactics just as much as the left?
No, I don't. I don't agree that it's just as much of a problem. The elitism that comes from the left is much different than, there's a lot of diverse opinions on the right. And frankly, in my experience, that I don't know many, if any, folks that I've been involved with in conservative politics that actually they want to use the government to push their personal opinion. Now, we can debate of traditions, centuries-old traditions, if we think the government should protect that tradition and not redefine it, those kind of things. I'm not saying that both sides haven't erred, but what we see now is an illiberalism from the left that is very intolerant and very aggressive about anything that does not agree with their paradigm. I see it much more on the left, and maybe I'm biased as someone who's conservative, and I can't comment specifically on the AP argument because I don't know the details. But what we should do is, okay, what is the truth about American history? Can we discern that? Can we have a debate about what is true? Is America really exceptional? Are our ideas different and unique? What made America so prosperous and strong? And I think if you look into that, you'll start to see that America is an exception to all other nations in the way that we developed and grew, not from central planning, not from top down, but very much millions of people making their own decisions about what they valued and how they wanted to live. And that's what created so much spontaneous entrepreneurism, innovation in America that came from no other country. And anyone who takes an objective look at American history, you'll see a lot of flaws. And generally it was because we weren't following the principles in the Declaration and the Constitution. That's when we went wrong. But the dynamic of the individualism in America was so different than any other country. And historians at the time, whether it was de Tocqueville or others, I mean, if you read the history, there's a good reason to put in a good history class that this country is very different than any other country that's ever been on the face of the earth. Yes?
Hi, Senator DeMint. First off, thank you for coming down today. My question pertains to starting the discussion about conservative views on campus, because one problem I find, and I'm sure every other conservative in here has found, is that as soon as you start bringing up your ideas, you are shut down as either ignorant or intolerant, and the discussion ends there. How would you recommend keeping that discussion going, even if, I mean, they're trying to shut you down?
Well, I've had that problem a lot myself. Well, the labels aren't helpful. I mean, conservatism in South Carolina means something different than it does at Yale. At Yale, if you put the conservative label, they're going to think you're a hater, you're a bigot. All these things come with it. So I think we need to start talking about the ideas that we see make a difference. What we've found is we've gone around and we've talked to a lot of people who don't vote conservative, who don't call themselves conservatives, but you sit down and talk to them, and generally they agree with these ideas of self-reliance and working hard and individualism and free markets, and they may express it in different words, but they generally agree with that. And so the labels need to be thrown aside, and what we need to talk about is what really works. And it gets back to what has worked in America. Conservatism is more than a political philosophy. It's a recognition that true progress is made by building on knowledge of the past, things that work, that you can prove work. That's why we have we're about 130 people at Heritage doing research all the time to try to quantify objectively what are those things that have worked that made society better and freer in America and all around the world. And it becomes very apparent those principles that work. And the left tends to want to throw out the principles and the ideas and start fresh and move towards glorious ends. But it's not based on any sound thinking. So I don't know how to get people who, the reason they shut you down is they're afraid that they can't defend their point of view. That's this whole thing about freezing and personalizing it and polarizing and make it a personal issue about you being ignorant so they don't have to debate the ideas. And in a forum like this creates a little bit of a critical mass where you can bring some folks together, and you've probably got a mixed group here of folks who are conservative, those who come just to find out what the enemy is thinking. But it's a way where we can at least have some questions, and usually someone comes and they want to ask a hardball question to get me in trouble, but at least there's enough commonality here on both sides that we feel free to talk. But if they're shutting you down, they're probably not worth talking to right now, and just love them and be a friend. And at some point, they're going to see there's some wisdom in your life, and they might ask you your opinion. That's all I can say on it.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you. Again, Senator, thank you so much for coming out to campus. We really appreciate it. So I kind of want to shy away from the censorship and talk to you a little bit more about something that's happening in this country. And something that you kept stressing is the conservative value of kind of the ability to decide for yourself and autonomousness, if that's an actual word. And I was curious then if you could explain why you believe that one cannot be a fiscal conservative and be a social conservative at the same time, as well as kind of a connected idea, what you, Senator, think about the libertarian movement in the United States and how it's picking up momentum.
Okay, good questions. At Heritage, we see that there are three pillars to the foundation of strength in America. It's a strong society, a strong economy, and a strong defense. And these are inseparable. And you cannot have a strong economy without a strong society that produces the people who can succeed in a free society, who have the character and the skills to succeed. And to do that, you've got to have strong families. You've got to have strong communities. You've got to have strong volunteer institutions of churches and charity groups. That's what creates a strong civil society. And that's what has made America so strong in the past. And the more of that civil society you replace with government, generally the weaker your economy is going to be, and your defense is going to get weaker, as has happened in America. That's why I say you can't really be a fiscal conservative and deal with just economic and material issues unless you understand that the true underpinnings of a strong economy is going to come from a strong culture. So that's really what we're for. We're for strong families, strong communities, civil society institutions, and that's really what we want to talk about. I'm not as interested in talking about what we're against, but if people don't understand that if government develops incentives that destroy families, that replace civil society institutions, that discourage work, the things that build character in people, that basically violate religious principles so that families, if they want to, cannot teach biblical moral principles to their children that help them succeed in life. That doesn't mean they have to, but they should have that opportunity if they want to. And I just know from experience that the people who can succeed, and what really helps build our economic system is this strong society that underpins it. So that's why I say we can that you have to have a strong society to have a strong economy, and you have to have a strong economy to have a strong defense. The libertarian, what role it plays, and I have said that I don't think there is a majority left for freedom-minded Americans except for the combination of the basic ideas of libertarianism and conservatism. And I can talk and debate and argue with libertarians anytime because we have the same foundation. We believe in freedom and free people and individualism. And people may disagree with other aspects, but I can debate rationally with a libertarian. I cannot debate rationally with a liberal who tries to tell me that the welfare program has helped the poor, because it hasn't. And it's made things worse. It's destroyed families. It's created generational poverty. And I've got all the facts on my side. I can't debate someone who won't look at performance and outcomes of things, won't look at rational things. But I can debate a libertarian who thinks that we should legalize drugs in America, because he can make a case that, hey, we spent billions and billions of dollars and we hadn't made any progress on the issue. And I can say I don't think government should endorse the use of drugs because it destroys people, and that's an activist role of government that is not libertarian. And I could go on for an hour with a good libertarian and have a good time, and we could walk off and have a beer or whatever. But there is a majority left of people in this country. A lot of folks who've been liberals are coming to the right through the libertarian spectrum because it's kind of a leave me alone mentality that works, but the foundations of libertarianism are consistent with what we believe, and I think you can build a national consensus around those ideas. You don't have to agree on everything, but you can have good, honest debate. Yes, sir.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming. I wanted to go back to the censorship issue. So for the past couple of years, we've seen a huge increase in like that extreme political correctness and that kind of enforcement of speaking rules. But recently, like very recently, I've seen a lot more articles criticizing that and saying, we need to go back to open debate. So my question for you is, do you see this political correctness increasing, or do you see it as a fad that kind of dies off in the next year or two? Well,
it's something we're going to have to push back. And I know you've all had dealings with people personally, and when they're wrong, have you noticed they yell and they get mad if they can't defend their point of view. It happens in marriage, it happens in friendships, and it definitely happens in political discourse and on campus. The problem with the left is they cannot rationally defend their point of view. So the only way they can win an argument is to shut you down. And they've got a lot of elitists in the media or whatever who don't want to hear that other opinion because it doesn't appear politically correct or they don't like that opinion. So it's going to be a battle, but it's so irrational that if we have small groups of people who stand up, what you'll find is there are a lot of people here at Yale, and I've seen it at a lot of campuses. You get them together in a group and they're going to agree with the liberal side. They won't say anything in a group setting. But if you get them one-on-one, and they'll tell you what's on their heart. It's very different. There's so much intimidation. It's not just on campus. This is in business now. It's in politics. But what I found, if you've got a few people who are willing to stand up and take the hits, and if you survive, then people just say, hey, we can do it too. And that's why a little group like the Buckley group here at Yale is so important. If you survive and come together and have a good time, you're not mad at anybody. You may be conservative, but you're not mad about it. And you can still like people who disagree with you and be civil to them. Set a great example. And what you'll find is you just attract people who want to, they may not know they're conservative or ever want to use that label, but they're intrigued by the sharing of ideas and things. But it's going to be a long-term fight. Because the folks on the other side, they really want control. And that's what I've seen in the political environment. It's not so much about what works. It's about control. We know Obamacare is not working. It's going to make health care more expensive. It's going to make doctors harder to find. We know all the facts. But the left is not concerned about results. They're concerned about control. And they eventually think that they can make life fairer and more equal if they can control it all. I think there's some good motivation behind it all, but the control of it is what they're getting to. And so that is the end, and the means to those ends don't really matter. And so we're in for a fight. And the tendency is I find on the right, is that we don't like the confrontation and are not willing to deal with it. But they can surely make you miserable if you express your opinion. I've seen that myself, man. And it's hard to dig out of it. It's suffocating when you say something. Probably come out of a meeting like today. Somebody tweets something. You know, I walk out of here, the press people back at Heritage say, my gosh, what did you say to men up there? And they got millions of people saying you said this. But they know how to shut you up. But I don't shut up. I've just learned to, and if you're going to make a difference, you're going to have to stand up for what you believe, and you've got to know what you believe is right. I'm not interested in my opinion unless it's right. And so if I can be rationally and objectively honest, then that's what keeps me going. So let's be honest and true to what we believe and keep searching for the truth. Question everything. There's nothing wrong with being cynical. If you believe something and someone shares another view, listen to them, because we all have got some things that we can learn. And particularly if you're on a college campus, I would think this is where we should be learning as much as we can. So sorry to ran on and on about that. Yes?
So you speak a lot about control, and specifically recently we've seen with Affordable Care Act, net neutrality, the government keeps imposing new controls onto the citizens. And like this history goes back through FDR when he made Social Security a tax that everyone had to pay, so that way no one could get rid of it because everyone would have a common interest in it. Like a recent example I could think of is a woman divorces her husband in California because he makes minimum wage, but she'll make more money on the public welfare payroll as a single mother. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering, what do you see as a solution to move away from the welfare state? Yeah. And how do you see that, since we're already this far in, how can we get out of it?
Well, I think when we think about welfare and we think about the poor, we need to think about the people involved. They're not freeloaders. They're folks that we need to rescue from a situation that government has put them in. And we need to have an incentive structure where if someone gets a job, they don't lose benefits quicker than they gain them. And you're right. A lot, if a young couple were to get married, it's likely that the guy could not make as much money as the girl could get on welfare if she has a child. But we have to have it so that it works differently. That if you're poor and you need public assistance, and frankly this could be handled better at the state and local level, a lot through volunteerism. When we start trying to do things from the federal level, even if our intentions are good, you can't manage something without a lot of waste and corruption. But we just need to create something where someone gets a job, that they can transition and make sure that they can still get health coverage and that they don't lose benefits. We just need to think rationally about it. We don't want to create a snare or a permanent trap for people where they can't get in and they can't get out. Because most people who are poor would like the dignity of being self-reliant, the chance to work and to learn and to grow. And when we create a public system that makes it hard for that to happen, I don't think we're doing anybody any favors. But there are a lot of designs, and we've worked with them at Heritage. We have some of the best poverty experts in the world. But there's things that are obvious. We debate marriage, but there's less than a 5% chance, if I remember my numbers right, that if a child grows up in a home with a married mom and dad, no matter where they start economically, there's almost no chance they'll ever live in poverty. I mean, and it makes, if you were rationally looking at this, you would say, okay, well, what can the government do to encourage family formation and marriage? The government doesn't have to decide who you're going to marry, but certainly if you get married, you shouldn't lose money. That's not a good thing to do. So I just think we can pursue these things rationally and certain welfare. There needs to be safety nets in a civil society. The closer those are to home, the more likely they are to really help people. I was involved in a lot of charity boards myself, and there's certainly much better ways to do it than we do it in Washington. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Returning to Bill Buckley, what Zach said, and the question of social conservatism, it's come up in a few of the questions recently, but basically you're saying now the modern day left oftentimes likes to use control or to force their opinions on people, used down their throats and things earlier. But on the difference between social conservatives and libertarians, a libertarian, might say to that, we would love to have a strong culture, but why not also allow open debate about that or give people freedom to, choose the way in which they live? Certainly not creating incentives against certain it seems like what you're discussing is, you said incentives against strong families. So certainly not creating those, but allowing people to, as they direct their economic activities with freedom and all their other activities with freedom, allow them, on issues of drugs and same-sex marriage, allow them to conduct, and whatever other social issues there are, allow them to conduct that with a certain measure of freedom. How would you respond to, libertarians who say that?
Yeah, well, I think people should live the way they want and love who they want and have the lifestyles they want. The question is, I don't think it's libertarian to have an activist federal judge redefine an institution that's centuries old. We can accommodate any way people want to live, any contracts or whatever, but to redefine an institution that's centuries old that really belongs to civil society more than it does to government, I just think is an intrusion. And I could argue, I think have a good debate with a libertarian, that is an activist government assertion onto our society that is not right. But that doesn't mean I think people need to be able to live the way they want, and my opinion should not be imposed on them by some act of government. But it's just the position that the government takes is something that is at issue, and that's and of course state governments decided years ago to regulate marriage to protect it, and it's never been the role of the federal government to define it or regulate it. So I don't see that as anywhere near libertarian for the federal government to take a role in marriage. Frankly, I think the people of states need to be able to make that decision. And if the state decides other than what I like, at least there might be states that you could live in that agreed with you. And that kind of competition between states is probably important. The same is true for abortion right now. I think if you look at the real facts there, I think more and more we know from technology. We have a human being at a very early age, and to lose 3,000 young people a day is something that should be on the hearts of every American. But there's still, the Americans divided on the issue. I think more and more Americans, particularly young people, are beginning to see that is a moral issue. And it's not just for one person to decide because somebody else is getting hurt. I think we can talk about those things rationally, and if the country's divided, it probably shouldn't be decided in Washington. It should probably let the states decide and make progress on the issue and build consensus. That's probably a fairly good rule. If the country is heavily divided on something, that we should let the states make progress, and they are. A lot of states have decided on the marriage issue. A lot of states have made decisions on the abortion issue, and it's something we can all look at and learn what is the best role for the government to play here. I'm not pretending they're easy issues to deal with, But I think, again, libertarian on issues like drugs, I mean, that's for the government to endorse things that are not only bad for you, but also might be bad for those around you and very costly to society. I mean, I can prove that with numbers. So it may be my business whether or not you take drugs. So it's something we can at least debate, honestly. I don't know that I'm right. But the government endorsement of drugs gives me real heartburn, because that's, once the government says it's right, it's hard for a parent to say, that's wrong and I don't want you to do it.
2 points. One, I can back up your talk about the fellow out in Michigan who wrote.
Omar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have a grandson who also was a sophomore at Michigan who likes to write and decided that with a grandfather and a father who are a little to the right of Genghis Khan, he probably shouldn't be writing in the political side. And
How did you get in here anyway?
Decided that probably he'd be better off writing for sports. So he's covered, hockey and the rest. So I know exactly what you're talking about, because he knew if he got in with his point of view and started writing for the Review, okay, with his point of view, okay, they'd tar and feather him. The real point that I wanted to ask you about is, how long are we going to survive this? These bunch of yahoos down in Washington, okay? All right, and even if we survive these guys fiscally and foreign policy-wise, how long is it going to take us to dig out from under this mess?
Yeah, I have been amongst them, and what you say, the reason I'm at Heritage now is I saw that politics is downstream from the culture, and we're not going to change Washington until we get people all over the country engaged, and that's why the debate is important, and that we learn to civilly exchange ideas and stuff. But the problem is people don't know what's really happening in Washington. They're not willing. And our media doesn't help us with it. I mean, it should be obvious that centralized government in Washington does not work very well. I mean, we need it to defend our country. We need to make sure there's a framework for justice and equality in our country, but it can't manage programs very well. I know, I worked in the private sector. I was a consultant for total quality management, and once you get more than 300 people in an organization, you often begin to lose economies of scale very quickly, and so the continuous quality doesn't work anymore. You try to manage millions of people at the federal level through political people and bureaucrats. You can't run our healthcare system. You cannot do it, and it's just a crazy idea. You can't run our education system from Washington, and if we could just look at the facts. So the best way is to begin to move things out of Washington. But whether we will survive will depend on the people themselves and whether people come together and push back against Washington. Because I know from being there that if the voices outside of Washington aren't loud enough, they're going to listen to their cronies on K Street. They're going to listen to the big unions, the big Wall Street, both parties. And I've been as critical of Republicans as I have of Democrats. And neither one of them like me very much because they don't want to know the truth, because we call them out every time they vote for some kind of big subsidy or corporate welfare or whatever. But we can survive. We see it at the state level when people getting more engaged. Places where you never thought you could have a conservative elected governor is starting to happen. And where they cut taxes, they see the economy improving. Where they have right to work, freedom in the workplace. You see businesses moving in from all over the world. And so we see what works, and that's what we're trying to do, is just keep holding up that picture to America. Look what works. Look what works. But vote for yourself. Forget the parties. Vote for yourself, for heaven's sakes. That's the message we want to get out across the country. But I think we can survive. America is amazingly resilient. The fact that we're even have an economy now, given all the regulations and everything that's coming out of Washington, is amazing. But someone mentioned the internet a minute ago. Can there be a better example of something that is working well without the government? There's not a problem. No one has been cheated or whatever, and now they want to regulate it and make it a regulated monopoly. Basically, that's what it is. Americans should say, this is nuts. This is the only thing that works because the government hadn't been able to figure out how to regulate it. Now they're trying to regulate it, and then they'll figure out how to tax it. And then once they start taxing it, it's the little guy who's going to pay. And if you don't think some of the big internet companies, Comcast, others, are not behind this, because having a regulated monopoly protects their position in the market and creates barriers to entry for all the other little guys. Folks, it gets down to cronyism, and that's why all over the country we're talking about conservative promise to America is opportunity for all, favoritism for none. If you can live with that, then I think we can have a government that works. So thank you, sir.
Thanks for coming.
Senator?
Yes, sir. Okay, 2 more.
Senator, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You've talked about freedom of speech on campus, and I think the corollary to that is the importance of diversity on campus, which is what this organization is about. One truism is that in academia and most colleges and universities across the country, particularly the bigger and better known, the higher prestige universities, tend to be dominated by an enormous majority of people who are not conservative on the faculty. So my question is, with the availability now of online learning and the internet and the Heritage Foundation, is there any role that the Heritage Foundation could play to try to expand the available resources for students who feel that they're not getting a broad and diverse picture of various subjects which are subject to political correctness?
No, it's a good question, and it's really happening. It's something we've worked on. One of the things is Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, has a bill that would create more flexibility and accreditations for institutions of higher learning. It would allow states to play a role so that you might have traditionally accredited, which are accredited by the federal government, which if we look at, there's very little quality control of what is being taught or whether or not it's practical or relevant to the work environment. But allowing other, again, industry associations to put together accredited organizations where someone could go to school to learn to do something particular to their interest. But the accreditation is one thing, but to making more and more materials available, working with employers, until employers recognize other forms of education, apprenticeships and things like that, people are still going to have to get an accredited 4-year degree somewhere in order to get a job. But that's beginning to change, because if you talk to employers, they'll tell you that the students that are coming out of college today know less and less, not only about skills in the workplace, but how to think. And I'll just give you one quick example, because one guy on a production line, I tour a lot of facilities, and I didn't actually believe this, but there were products going down the line where they were assembling little pieces in different rooms coming down the line. And he said, the problem I have now is a 4-year graduate can sit here and see a problem, and they don't immediately know they have to keep going back the line until they find the problem. I said, I could, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I could bring in a guy from the farm who didn't have any education, but he naturally knew if there's a problem here that is happening back that way. And it's just a way of thinking in a big picture. But I was just amazed that an employer made that assessment. So I think you're going to see more and more pressure from employers and folks to try to make our education system to conform to a society where people can actually be successful. And it's starting to happen. It just needs to happen quicker. One more question. I need to let all of you go.
Thank you, Senator. I'm wondering about this kind of marketplace for ideas, and it seems to me, like you said, it's very valuable in the case where you can show it kind of empirically, this economic policy works, or in the case where, you have a common foundation, as you mentioned, like talking with libertarians. But it seems to me that most of the debate on this campus, at least, and kind of more broadly, deals with issues where people don't have a common foundation and where people can't, empirically demonstrate something works, particularly with social issues, questions of marriage, abortion, for example, drugs. What role does the marketplace of ideas play kind of in that discussion, in those discussions?
Well, I think you need to be able to share the disagreement. So because you find, particularly at the college age, I thought I knew everything when I was in college, and I quickly learned as I went through, and most of the things I thought I knew, it's like Reagan once said, it's not that people are ignorant, they just know a lot of things that aren't true. And we do that. We develop our opinions, but part of the university environment should be challenging your ideas, but not necessarily destroying the principles that you believe in. I think there should be a fair interchange and not so much intimidation. There's a lot of intimidation on campus. But you're right. I think our culture has kind of grown up where we don't have as many common denominators. I really can't appeal to many sources of truth to make a point to someone. And we found out in the conservative, I can't really go out and talk to young people about how important the Constitution is. Why is that relevant? Why does that have anything to do with anything? But I can tell, and if you talk about central planning, and they don't know what I'm talking about. But if you want to explain freedom to someone in college, you can say, well, how would you like to have to buy 15 songs to get 2 that you wanted? Most young people say, that's ridiculous. I'd never consider that. I could just go to iTunes or somewhere and buy exactly the song I want. Okay, you understand freedom, but in a different way than I do. You understand how to make friends all over the world on the internet, make your own choices. It's more individualistic than anything we had. We had to buy albums and CDs with 15 songs on them to get the 2 we wanted. That's the way we grew up. But then if you say, okay, if you like to make all your own decisions, if you like to get just what you want and not something else, why in the heck would you want Obamacare? It is designed to give you 15 things when as a young person you need 2. But we need you to pay for 15 so somebody my age doesn't have to pay for the things that I really need. And it's the same way as all these centralized things is they're trying to take away your choices and individualism when it's not necessary. We don't need that kind of uniformity in society. So you're on the right side if you really believe that building on things that have worked in the past are going to create better outcomes in the future. That's where progress comes from. All progress comes from knowledge of the past. That's why you're in a university, to learn about that knowledge so you can build on it in the future. That's why we're part of the conservative movement, because that's how you make the country work. Thanks, everybody.